भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। हरे कृष्ण। परं
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Shashwat. I'll read the word-to-word translation and purport. Itaha, all these women, Param, highest, Strivam, womanhood, Apata, Peshalam, without individuality, Nirastha, without, Saucham, purity, Batasadhu, auspiciously glorified, Kurvate, do they make, Yasam, from whose, Grahat, homes, Pushkara Lochana, the lotus-eyed, Pati, husband, Najatu, never at any time, Apaiti, goes away, Aharipi, by presentation, Hridi, in the heart, Sparsham, endeared. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Translation. All these women auspiciously glorified their lives despite them being without individuality and without purity. Their husband, the lotus-eyed personality of Godhead, never left them alone at home. He always pleased their hearts by making valuable presentation. Hare Krishna, Shobha Mataji. Would you like to read the purport?
Yes, Hare Krishna Mataji. Yes, I'll read the purport.
So we are on Canto 1, Chapter 10 and Text 30. We've done till the translation. If you can read the purport, Mataji, I'll really appreciate.
Yeah, my humble obeisance to all the devotees and Bhaja Govind. The purport by His Grace Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. The devotees of the Lord are purified souls. As soon as the devotees surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord sincerely, the Lord accepts them, and thus the devotees at once become free from all material contamination. Such devotees are above the three modes of material nature. Therefore, there is no bodily disqualification of a devotee, just as there is no qualitative difference between the Ganges women, merchants, and laborers are not very intelligent, and thus it is very difficult for them to understand the science of God or to be engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. They are more materialistic, and less than them are the Kiratas, Yunas, Andhras, Pulindas, Pulkasas, Abhiras, Kankas, Yavanas, Akhasas, etc. But all of them can be delivered if they are properly engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. By engagement in the service of the Lord, the designative qualifications are removed, and as pure souls, they become eligible to enter into the kingdom of God. The fallen girls under the clutches of Bhaumasura sincerely prayed to Lord Shri Krishna for their deliverance, and their sincerity of purpose made them at once pure by virtue of devotion. The Lord therefore accepted them as his wives, and thus their lives became glorified. Such auspicious glorification was still more glorified when the Lord played with them as the most devoted husband. The Lord used to live with his 16,108 wives constantly. He expanded himself into 16,108 plenary portions, and each and every one of them was the Lord himself without deviation from the original personality. The Shruti mantras affirms that the Lord can expand himself into many. As husband of so many wives, he pleased them all with presentations, even at a costly endeavor. He brought the Parijata plant from heaven and implanted it at the palace of Satyabhama, one of the principal queens. If therefore anyone desires the Lord to become one's husband, the Lord fulfills such desires in full. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Mataji, for reading the purport for us. Shashwin, are you able to do the Mangla Charan now? Hare Krishna.
Yes, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Oh.
ॐ ज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप तदा नायं तदान्ति स्वपदान्तिकम् वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोन् श्रीयुतापतकमलम् श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवंश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातम् लघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैनं स्वावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीशाखान्वितं हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपीच गोपिका कान्त राधा कान्ता नमोऽस्तुते तप्त काञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुष्टुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे
Hare
राम हरे
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Shashwin, for the wonderful Mangla Charan recital. And thank you, Shobna Mataji, for reading the purport for us. So today we have with us Bhaja Govindam Prabhuji with us after a long time. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for joining this small group. And in spite of your busy schedule, you've given your time. We are eternally grateful to you. Prabhuji, we are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. We are on Canto 1, Chapter 10. And the text for today is text 30. We hand over to you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Krishna, thank you for the opportunity, Mataji. It's nice to do this service more regularly as well. It's purifying for me as well, actually. For the speaker is as purifying as it is for the listener, so it's good. Nice to be engaged. Jay, thank you. So before going into the verse, what I'd like to do is just do a recap of how we got to the verse that we're at today, right? So if we go back to the previous chapter, chapter 9, we see that the Pandavas, Krishna, sages, they're all going to the place where the battle of Mahabharata took place, right? At the Kurukshetra battlefield. And this is after the war had taken place. And there they go to pay their obeisances, to pay their respect to Bhishma Dev, who's lying on a bed of arrows. And we see that Yudhishthira Maharaj and Bhishma Dev have a very spiritual discourse, right? We can see that there's most of the chapter is that conversation between Yudhishthira Maharaj and Bhishma Dev. And topics such as the higher principles behind all the atrocities or the life events that the Pandavas had to endure and go through take place. The supremacy of Krishna as the Supreme Lord is discussed. And then things like the Varnashram system and the duties and how Yudhishthira Maharaj can eventually take those duties and detach himself from the world itself. And then we hear about the glorious passing of Bhishma Dev, who left his body meditating on the most attractive and beautiful form of Lord Krishna, specifically Lord Krishna as the chariot driver of Arjuna. Right? And then at the very end, we see and hear or read about how Yudhishthira Maharaj had, and all the Pandavas and everybody else had left. And specifically, it calls out how Yudhishthira Maharaj went back to Hastinapur to rule the kingdom. So that's where chapter 9 ends. And then chapter 10, the very first few verses, it's Shunaka Rishi or Shunaka Muni asking Sutta Goswami, like, how were the Pandavas able to enjoy the kingdom after everything that just happened? And it's such a valid question. If we think about everything that the Pandavas went through, right, from birth, right, with all how much Duryodhana and all of their cousins had tried to kill them, poison them so many different ways, ultimately abolishing them from the kingdom, and then even having to go through a war with their own cousins, with their own family, where they killed cousins, family members, friends, millions of soldiers, right? It's quite natural that anybody would be disturbed in that situation. And Sutta Goswami answers very nicely by explaining that the Pandavas ruled the kingdom as a matter of duty, right? So they engaged in the material energy as a matter of duty on the instruction of Krishna and Bhishma Dev. And then he goes on to describe how the results of them performing that duty, of them ruling the kingdom, was so perfect, right? The rainfall was perfect, the earth was producing nice produce, nice grains and everything else, the necessities that were required for life. The cows were giving milk in abundance, and ultimately all the living entities in the kingdom were looked after so nicely, right? That was the perfection of the rule that Yudhishthira Maharaj had at the time. There was no anxiety, there was no depression, no disturbances for anyone. But then what happens is that Krishna decides to leave Hastinapur. And there we hear about, and this is quite a few months after, there we hear about how all sorrow breaks loose, right? There's so much lamentation, there's so much anxiety in all the citizens and all the members of society. And just as Krishna is having that grand leaving ceremony, because he wants to go back, right? He doesn't belong in Hastinapur, he belongs in Dwarka, because that's where his wives are, that's where, he set up his kingdom. So as he's having his leaving ceremony, right, then we hear how specifically the ladies who are on the rooftops just watching, looking at what's happening, they start having a discourse, they're having their own conversation about Krishna, about the Supreme Lord. They first talk about the supreme lordmanship of Krishna, right? How he is Ishvara Parama Krishna, how he is the supreme personality of Godhead, how he is Anadir Adir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam, how he's the origin of all, how he's got no other origin, how he's the prime cause of all causes. They describe how he is Om Purnam, how he's perfect and complete. There's nothing that he needs, there's nothing that he desires that would fulfill him, right? He's always perfectly complete. Then they talk about his relationship with the material energy, Ishavasamidam Sarvam, right? How everything, animate and inanimate, is controlled and owned by the Lord. And then they even go as far as talking about what we hear in Bhagavad Gita 15:15 of Vedeshtra Sarvair Ahameva Vedyo, how by all the Vedas, Krishna is to be known. So go through this whole list of different attributes of Krishna's supremeness. And then from verse 26, they start going into the more intimate pastimes. They start going into the fortune of those who experienced the more intimate, the more loving and human-like pastimes of the Lord, right? How he was born in Mathura, how he dealt and interacted with the Dwarkavasis. And specifically a phrase used was Smita Avalokam, right? A glance with the favor of sweet smiling, right? Such beautiful interactions that are described between Krishna and the Dwarkavasis. And then they even describe in brief the ecstasies of those who had a conjugal relationship with Krishna. And in yesterday's verse, we see that the specific thing that was focused on by the ladies of Hastinapur are those who had the fortune of marrying Krishna, right? Being one of the queens, one of the 16,108 queens, as Shobha Mataji nicely described from the purple in the last paragraph of the purple. And at first, specifically yesterday's verse, focus was more on the 8 principal queens, and they're sort of the higher class queens. And in today's verse, when we come to it, we start seeing that, okay, now they're describing the fortune of those who are we could say of a lower class. And that term actually comes from Jiva Goswami's Priti Sandarbha, actually, where he specifically calls out the use of the word, just find it, abasta peshalam, which means without individuality. It's in the first line. He says that this word itself implies that what is being discussed here by the women of Hastinapur are those queens who were born or who were of a lower class. And we can see that this makes sense in context because the immediate next phrase that's used is nirasta shocham, right, which is without purity. So no, the Lord had 16,108 wives. And we know 8 of them were principal wives, but as described in the purple, and I know Gama Prabhu elaborated on it yesterday as well, 16,100 of those were actually kidnapped by Bomasu. So I won't go into the pastime because I believe Gama Prabhu nicely elaborated on it yesterday, but just to set enough of the scene for today's conversation, just in case anybody hasn't heard yesterday's class or familiar with the pastime. Bomasu is a demon, and he's basically created havoc, enough so that even Indra becomes disturbed and requests for Krishna's help. Indra actually comes to Krishna in Dwarka asking for his help. So Krishna goes, he defeats the demon, and as a result, he saves 16,100 princesses. Right. Now it's interesting. So when we think of high class, low class, oftentimes we will think, okay, high class are princesses, queens, princesses, queens. Low class are probably your shudranis, they're like cleaning the sweeps or so on. Sorry, cleaning the streets, if I can speak, right? Streets and so on. But here, Jiva Goswami is referring to those princesses still as lower class. Now, we can understand this because when we look at that pastime, or even just culture in general, right, there's a very specific understanding with what the qualities of a female are and qualities of a male, right? But when we specifically look at this pastime, what happens is that, okay, Krishna has now freed these princesses, and he's given them the option that, okay, you can go back home now. You know, you're no longer held captive. You're free to go where you wish. You can go back home. You can go back to your family. But the two things that stop them is, one, that they had stayed away from home. They were away from the shelter of their family members, of their father, their husbands, if they were married already previously, their children, right? I mean, these were princesses that were getting married to Krishna ultimately. So I've never heard if they've even been married before. But they were away for days, weeks, months, maybe even years. That's one thing. And the second thing is that having seen Krishna, they developed the desire to have Krishna as their husband. Now, culturally speaking, from a chastity perspective, we can see that, okay, when a woman stays away from home, away from that shelter of the father, the husband, the son, then it's considered that they're contaminated. Especially in this case, if we think about it, where they were stolen, basically, right? They were held captive by Bomasur. Modern days will, unfortunately go to the phrase that would come to mind is kidnapped and then raped, right? So naturally, there's a contamination aspect to this. So what would happen is that, okay, if somebody stayed away, if a woman had stayed away from home, then they'd be considered unchaste. Their chastity would come into question. And so even if they came back home, then because of that uncertainty behind their purity, they're automatically considered to be impure. And so no man would really accept such women. And we can go into the pastime of Sita and Ram here as well, because something similar happens there. Sita gets kidnapped by Ravan, and then a big adventure, action-packed, one of the best action-packed scenes and movies that you'll ever see or hear about or read about, better than any movie that we see in modern days, But ultimately what happens is that Ram kills Ravan, saves Sita, right? Takes time, right? But that happens. But that whole time, Sita was staying under the so-called protection of Ravan. And after Ram has saved Sita, what happens? Immediately, Sita is requested to undergo Agni, a test of Agni, right? Agni Pariksha, where she has to basically walk through fire to prove her chastity, to prove her purity. Now, those of us who know the story of Ramayana know that that Ravan also had the curse of not being able to touch any woman without their consent. So where was the question of Ravan even causing contamination on Sita? And in fact, Sita Devi is the eternal consort of Ram. So where is the question of Sita ever being impure? But for the purpose of society, Sita and Ram underwent that ordeal. They underwent that trial. And we know Sita walked through the fire and she came out the other side. There are other aspects as well, like, for example, how Sita the real Sita never actually went to Lanka and so on and so forth. But as it stands, she passed the test. And yet we find out that even after that test, even though she came out unscathed, right? She wasn't touched by the fire. She wasn't burned. She wasn't nothing happened to her. But even then, the society forced and compelled Ram to abandon Sita in the end. Even though she passed that test, the word on the street was so painful that Ram had to abandon Sita, despite Sita having proven her chastity. So we can see how big that aspect of the chastity of the woman being protected by father, husband, son is. And if they're staying away from home, then especially if they're staying under the house or the shelter of another man, then the chastity immediately becomes almost zero, basically. And even today, in today's day and age, especially in India, where there's a true sense of a civilized society, where the Vedic principles are upheld, we see that women are protected, right? We see that their chastity, their purity is well maintained and protected. They're cared for correctly. But then these women, these princesses, 16,100, they were kidnapped by Bhaumasura, just like how Sita Devi was kidnapped by Ravan by force. So immediately their place as being classified as a chaste woman becomes compromised in society, right? So they're immediately considered as having no purity. But as Prabhupada says in the purport, right, quote, the fallen girls under the clutches of Bhaumasura sincerely prayed to Lord Sri Krishna for their deliverance, and their sincerity of purpose made them at once pure by virtue of devotion. Unquote. By their desire to have Krishna as their husband and to be delivered by Krishna, these women who lost their place in society, not by their own intentional will or intentional action, but by force, even they gained the highest position. And what is that highest position? The association of Krishna. And in fact, it went further. They associated with Krishna as one of his wives. So we can take this teaching here that it doesn't really matter how abominable our past is. It doesn't matter how low our birth is. It doesn't matter how sinful our activities are, right? If we develop that sincere, serious desire to associate with Krishna and take shelter of him, then we can become purified. And we have evidence from this in the Bhagavad Gita as well. In chapter 9, when Krishna's talking about the most confidential knowledge, where he's sharing about the glories of devotional service, he says, Mam hi parthavya pashitya yepi syu papa yonaya striyo veshyas tatha shudra tepi yanti param gatim. Translation. O son of Pritha, those who take shelter in me, though they be of a lower birth, women, Vaishyas, merchants, and Shudras or workers, can attain the supreme destination. That's Bhagavad Gita 9:32. So Srila Prabhupada talks about these lower classes in the purport that we read as well in the first paragraph, right? Where he says women, merchants, and laborers are not very intelligent, and thus it is very difficult for them to understand the science of God, etc., etc. And Prabhupada also then goes on to talk about how there's the Gratas, the Hunas, Andhras, etc., who are lower classes. And this actually comes again from a verse in the Bhagavatam. Kirata Hunadra Pulinda Pulkasha Abhira Shambhaya Vanakashataya Yenye cha Papa Yatapashayashraya Sudhyanti Tasme Prabhavishnave Namah. This is from Canto 2, Chapter 4, verse 18. Translation. Garatas, Hunas, Andhras, Pulindas, Pulkashas, Abhiras, Shumbhas, Yavanas, members of the caste races, and even others addicted to sinful acts can be purified. How? By taking shelter of the devotees of the Lord. Due to his being the supreme power, I beg to offer my respectful obeisances unto him. So we can see from the verse in the Bhagavad Gita, from the verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that whatever our birth family may be, whatever our gender may be, whatever our occupation may be, whatever our social position may be, right? Whatever our material designations, whatever we identify ourselves as in society, none of that actually matters. None of it is an impediment for us to become purified or delivered. We all have different starting points, right? They're not necessarily higher or lower starting points. They're just different starting points. Everybody's path is different. But we can all be purified. We can all be delivered. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, in our verse, quote, provided we are properly engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. By engagement in the service of the Lord, the designative disqualifications are removed. And as pure souls, they become eligible to enter into the kingdom of God. So, okay, yes, we have all these different sinful activities or tendencies within us, occupations completely full of sin. But if we properly situate ourselves in the practice and process of devotional service, then whatever disqualifications we think we have, right, which prevents us from attaining the Lord, they're just removed. And we get to associate with the Lord. But we have to properly situate ourselves in devotional service. And that's so hopeful for all of us. And we can see as a practical example, if we look at Sri Prabhupada's disciples, right? Many of them, they come from a background which revolves around breaking the 4 regulated principles that we have. It revolved around having illicit sex. It involved around having intoxications. It involved around eating meat. It involved around gambling. And when we talk about chanting, like they didn't even know the mantra, right? And yet by the association of Prabhupada, by the association of devotees, by engaging themselves in some form of devotional service, even if it was just coming to the class, right? All their disqualifications gradually became removed. And we can see now, many of them are such great saintly personalities in ISKCON. So we have hope, right? When we look at this pastime, we can see, okay, these 16,108 wives, they were forced into lower natures, into a lower class of society. But by their desire, by their sincere desire to attain Krishna, that disqualification was removed. Then if we look at the next part of the translation, it's actually very, very interesting now, right? The next part is, quote, their husband, the lotus-eyed personality of Godhead, never left them alone at home. He always pleased their hearts by making valuable presentations. When I look at the list that we have on call, it looks like many of the members here are married, and so we can see, when we think of this verse, you can naturally see in the world today, I'm not saying Hare Krishna Prabhu's, Hare Krishna Mataji's, I'm not saying it applies to us on the call, but we can see that there are many couples out there that where the woman is so amazing at controlling in one way the man. It's through their loving glances. And the man just wants to go out of his way to please the woman, right? The man, just to please the wife, he'll go and buy valuable gifts, right? And what to speak of when the wife puts forward a desire that, oh, I really want this, I don't know, handbag or ring or whatever, or dress, sari, whatever it is. The man goes out of his way to please the wife. And so when we look at the verse, and specifically the line, okay, the Supreme Personality of Godhead never left them alone at home. He always pleased their heart by making valuable presentations. It almost sounds like Krishna's just another henpecked husband, no? Right? Somebody who's completely enamored and completely mad behind his wives, right? Just like conditioned men of this world. But then we hear that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Ishopanishad, he's described as Om Purnam, perfect and complete. And we know many times he's left the gopis, from the Ras Leela, or even Vrindavan in general, where he's left all of his girlfriends to go to Mathura or to, just go away from the dance. He's also described as Atmaram in various places in the Bhagavatam and in the scriptures. Atmaram means fully self-sufficient. Somebody who is fully self-sufficient has become a henpecked husband. He's completely under the control of his wives. How does this make sense? But we can make sense of this by the help of Prabhupada, and specifically the hint he gives in the very last line of the purport. Quote, if therefore anyone desires the Lord to become one's husband, the Lord fulfills such desires in full. Unquote. Krishna fulfills the desires of those who desire to have him. We can see this as Krishna fulfills the desires of his devotees, because the devotees desire only him. Krishna in Dwarka was playing the part of a husband to 16,108 wives. It wasn't because he needed or desired to enjoy that association. He did it out of his submission to the devotion of the devotees. The devotees desired, and so the Lord reciprocated with their desire. And he reciprocated in a way which was favorably disposed towards them. Right? So we can see that there's actually a theme that runs throughout our scriptures, especially the Bhagavatam, where the Lord is favorably disposed towards his devotees, and specifically when they're presenting their devotion forward, right? We can see in the case of Dhruva Maharaj, up until Dhruva Maharaj was performing his severe austerities in a very mechanical way, the Lord didn't appear. But as soon as there was tinges of bhakti, tinges of devotion that crept into that austerity, the Lord appeared and bestowed his mercy on him. We can see in the pastime of Prahlad Maharaj, when Hiranyakashipu is like going around, like breaking everything in his own kingdom, you know, like in his own palace, just to prove to Prahlad Maharaj that Vishnu doesn't exist, or I can defeat Vishnu. Prahlad Maharaj points to a pillar. And Nrsimhadev could have appeared out of anything that Hiranyakashipu broke. But just to fulfill the words of his devotee, he came out of the pillar that Prahlad Maharaj pointed. We can see in the pastime of Galya that up until, whilst the wives of Galya, the serpent, were quiet, you know, they didn't speak anything. Krishna was ready, he was just performing a dance on Galya, ready to even kill him, right? But as soon as the serpent's wives, the Nagapatnis, they spoke in a prayerful, devotional mood to Krishna, Krishna changed his mind. He was like, okay, yeah, I free Galya. You know, let Galya walk free. To protect Indra when Bali Maharaj was performing, you know, austerities and yagnas, etc., to take over the whole heavenly kingdom. When Indra went to Vishnu, Vishnu goes, okay, I'll come as Vamanadev. And what does he do? He's ready to take all of Bali Maharaj's opulences one by one, strip him completely of everything until there's nothing left, and he does that. But then we hear Bali Maharaj is ready to offer himself out of devotion. And what does Vamanadev do? He gives him Patal to look after, but not just that. He himself goes as the doorkeeper for Bali Maharaj's kingdom, bought by the devotion. So it's a theme throughout the Bhagavatam that devotion, you know, the pure devotion that the devotees display is what really attracts Krishna. And we can see in our Acharya's works as well, specifically right now referencing the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Rupa Goswami. There's a very nice explanation of how Krishna becomes attracted by devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada summarizes in the Nectar of Devotion. Quote, Srila Rupa Goswami has stated that devotional service attracts even Krishna. Krishna attracts everyone, but devotional service attracts Krishna. The symbol of devotional service in the highest degree is Radharani. Krishna is called Madan Mohan, which means that he is so attractive that he can defeat the attraction of thousands of Cupids. But Radharani is still more attractive, for she can even attract Krishna. Therefore, devotees call her Madan Mohan Mohani, the attractor of Cupid. To perform devotional service means to follow in the footsteps of Radharani, and devotees in Vrindavan put themselves under the care of Radharani in order to achieve perfection in their devotional service. In other words, devotional service is not an activity of the material world. It is directly under the control of Radharani. In Bhagavad Gita, it is confirmed that Mahatmas, or great souls, are under the protection of Devi Prakriti, the internal energy Radharani. So, being directly under the control of the internal potency of Krishna, devotional service attracts even Krishna himself. Unquote. As devotees, this is our primary goal: to perform and engage in devotional service in such a way that Krishna and his devotees become pleased and attracted by it. So when we're performing devotional service, we can meditate and think about what is our mood, what is our intention, what is our consciousness, our prayers. We can look at the service and just see it as, okay, this is just another task that I have to do. You know, like Kritika Mataji, you so diligently are always looking after the Zoom calls, starting them up, you know, scheduling the speakers, etc. You could see it as just a, okay, I have to do this. It's connected to KC, but you know, I just have to do it, kind of thing. Or we can endeavor in those activities thinking, how can I please Krishna the most? We can play to Radharani and go, engage me in service and guide me in my service to please Krishna, to please yourself, to please the devotee. When we're coming home from a long day at work, where the bosses just shouted at us and we're trying to go, you know, trying to meditate on Trinada Bisunichana, you know, more humble than a straw in the street, trying to be calm, peaceful, humble. We come home, and especially the Matajis, all glorious to yourselves, you come home and you engage in activities at home, cooking for the family, cooking for the deity. We could come home with the mentality, okay, I've just had a long day, I just need to cook my food, you know, offer it, okay, because I'm a devotee, I have to offer it to the deities, and then I can honor, my family can honor. Or we can go, okay, it's been a long day at work, it's still service, but now I'm coming directly in direct service to you, Krishna. Oh Radharani, oh Queen of the kitchen, you know, use me as your maidservant, use me as your servant to cook. Oh Radharani, you've got the benediction that you will never cook the same meal again. Right? Radharani has that benediction that she will never cook the same meal again. So we can pray to Radharani, okay, please, you know, guide me in a way that will please you, Krishna, and please Krishna and please you. And engage in service in that mood, in that mentality, in that consciousness. I'm guilty of this too. When I'm doing services, a lot of the times my consciousness is, okay, I have to do this service. You know, it's Krishna consciousness, so it's somehow connected to Krishna, but I just have to do the service. But actually, we should be praying, we should be meditating on the mood that the devotees that we hear about, read about, have. And that mood is very much focused on a devotional mood to please Krishna. I'm conscious of time, so I'll end on one point actually. There's a very nice verse in Canto 11, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, actually the first two verses. And it's a very hard-hitting verse, so I will have to explain it slightly. But yeah, so translation, quote, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Uddhava, by associating with my pure devotees, one can destroy one's attachment for all objects of material sense gratification. Such purifying association brings me under the control of my devotee. Now hear this. One may perform the Ashtanga Yoga system, engage in philosophical analysis of the elements of material nature, practice non-violence and other ordinary principles of piety, chant the Vedas, perform penances, take to the renounced order of life, execute sacrificial performances, and dig wells, plant trees, and perform other public welfare activities, give in charity, carry out severe vows, worship the demigods, chant confidential mantras, visit holy places, or accept major and minor disciplinary injunctions. But even by performing such activities, one does not bring me under his control. Such a mouthful. But what does this mean? We can be the world's greatest jnani. We can be the world's greatest garmi. We can be the world's greatest yogi. We can be the world's greatest social welfare, public welfare, human welfare, animal welfare person. But if we don't have devotion towards Krishna, Krishna is not going to be so attracted to that. Right? Just conscious of time, so I won't go through and read parts of the purport, but Srila Prabhupada's disciples have done a very nice service by compiling the commentaries of the acharyas and given purports to these verses. And specifically for this one, there's a point to be clarified here. It's not that we don't perform these pious or these pious activities, right? But the point is that those activities are secondary activities. The primary activity is to actually perform Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, etc., right? The 9 processes of devotional service. Those are more pleasing to Krishna than these pious or welfare activities. But we're conditioned, right? We still have attraction to the material energy. So we should engage our efforts as much as we can in those 9 processes. But where we need something else to engage in, then first thing is we should make it as mode of goodness as possible, right? The list that we just spoke, they're all mode of goodness activities, sacrifices, welfare activities, austerities, all these things. But specifically, we should do those in the mood that, okay, Krishna would be pleased by me doing this, therefore I'm going to do it. Not in the mood that, oh, I like doing animal welfare, or I like doing Samaritan work, so I'm going to do it. And yeah, okay, it pleases Krishna as well, but that's secondary. Oftentimes we have to go in really introspect about this, because oftentimes we as devotees will go, okay, yeah, like it pleases Krishna, that's why I'm doing it. But the reality is very different. We're doing it because it pleases us, and the fact that it pleases Krishna is a bonus, right? So when we're engaging in these activities, we should still do them because we're still conditioned. Radhanath Maharaj had initiations at the manor today, and so I was just reflecting on Radhanath Maharaj's service to Srila Prabhupada. And externally, we can see that he's built so many hospitals and so many of these sorts of social welfare places. But actually, when you look at the deeper meaning of what Radhanath Maharaj has done, he's engaged devotees in those welfare activities. But the core of everything is the fact that there's preaching going on there, that there's service to Krishna that is actually taking place in those hospitals, in those welfare places, orphanages, etc. So something Vishaka Mataji had also shared a while back at the manor in a Bhagavatam class. And this is, again, quite strong, but devotees don't care about food distribution. They care about prasadam distribution. We care more about giving the spirituality than the material aspect, because yes, the material will help them. But ultimately, what will actually help them is the spiritual. Right? So when we're going about our activities, our services, we should try and develop that mood that, okay, we don't want to neglect those services that are mode of goodness, because unless we can engage in the 9 processes completely, we still need to engage ourselves in material energy in some way. The best, of course, is engage it in mode of goodness in ways that will please Krishna. But have the mentality, have that consciousness that this will please Krishna, therefore I'm going to engage in this activity. Right. So yeah, ultimately we see that there are many, many pastimes that Krishna gives where he's presenting externally an activity which seems, okay, like this is very weird, okay, he's doing something very abnormal. But behind all of that, it's driven by the devotion of the devotees. And this is just, again, one of those. He's not a henpecked husband. He's a henpecked devotee of a devotee, right? Where he's attracted to the devotion of the devotee, and that's what buys him out. Surrender. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for this wonderful class and very important points mentioned today about how Krishna is a devotee of his devotee. And I mean, we know that, but it being emphasized here as a husband, I think all of us in this group, all the women in this group would understand what that means. And secondly is any activities we do, we at least I never did it to please to say that it will please Krishna. I did it because it is Krishna consciousness, and the side effect was it will please Krishna. But now I've understood that we should do all our activities to please Krishna. Maybe the side effects could be something different. I'd also like to acknowledge today we have new devotees on this group, Jessica Naran and Raman Raju, and there was another devotee, I think she's probably left, but I'd like to appreciate them. Thank you very much for joining the group. We meet on every day at the same time on the same link, so kindly join again. Just if you can tell us where you are from, if you can switch, if you are able to switch on your videos, we'd really appreciate that. And
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Madam.
Hare Krishna.
Ramya here, and I'm part of Bhaja Govindam Prabhu's BV group and Nikhil Prabhu's group. So he dropped as a link there. So yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us. Hare Krishna. We are a very small town in Kenya, so the world is a small place now, and everybody can meet anywhere. So thank you very much for joining in. Hare Krishna. Okay, we can open up to questions. Are there any questions or comments on this group?
I have one question, Mataji, but I joined midway. Maybe I missed it. But thanks, Prabhu, for briefing. But when you said, when you offer devotional service, the goal is to please Krishna, fair point. And what would be the mood, right? Like I saw Nikhil Prabhu's message today where I got a little confused, where they said it could be any bhav, right? Like Vatsalya bhav, Sakya bhav, you can be considering him as a friend, you know, as a child or what have you. But why not as parents, right? Like why not as a father of that mode? Because we are also devoted to our parents in offering the services, which we do with love and affection. Well, I understand Prabhupada's message in one of the lectures that if you consider them as parents, you have the mood of, you know, receiving from your parents and not giving. Fair point. But when we offer these devotional services, why don't we consider in that bhav, or shouldn't we consider? A little lost there.
Yeah, no, thank you for the very nice question. And just for context, the quote was about Sri Prabhupada. Context is important to that quote as well. It was specifically, and Nikhil probably can correct me, but it was specifically referring to how the Christian mood of worship to God is seeing as the Father and only the Father, right? So this was Prabhupada basically going, okay, yeah, that is very good. But actually with parents, what we generally do, we just take from the parents, right? It's only very later on that children start giving back. So the idea was that, okay, that's very nice. But actually, if we look at Krishna as our son, then we'll offer the services, we'll treat him, you know, differently. We won't take from him, just take. We'll give him. So yeah, there's nothing wrong in that mood of seeing Krishna and serving him as our father. But the mood that Srila Prabhupada was really trying to differentiate here is father as a giver versus father as somebody to be loved, right? So we can see we have the 5 rases, right? The Shantaras, Dasyaras, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, right? Neutrality in service, friendship, parenthood, and then conjugal. we hear time and time again that our focus is on on the first three, right? Friendship, parental, and conjugal. Why? Because they have a more loving, intimate relationship with the Lord. However, we as practitioners, we as sadhakas, our mood should be more initially in the initial stages to be more servitor oriented, that we're going to Krishna to serve him. Because later on, as we mature in our Krishna consciousness, as we mature in our practices, then we would naturally get an inclination towards certain moods, right? Some will be naturally attracted to Yashodhama's pastimes. Somebody will be naturally attracted to the pastimes of the Gopas or the Gopis. Naturally attracted, not based on our material, like in a male body, I like the fact that Krishna associates with so many Gopis, so I'm attracted to that. No, not in that sense, but in the sense that we just naturally have that inclination. So initially, our mood should be of service. All reverence and love should be there, right? We can have, like, I listen to Amarinda Prabhu a lot, so he often really encourages us to, when we're offering food to the deities, we offer it in the mood that, okay, like, you're going to eat this food now, right? Which is very parental, right? Because Gauranitai are children. It's the children names of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. So when we offer the food, we can have that mood that, okay, I'm looking after you, even though we know all reverence sign, they're the ones looking after us. But developing that loving relationship, but always being mindful of the awe and reverence and serving in that mood is our current stage. But as we progress, that's when the real loving symptoms of whatever rasa we have with Krishna eternally manifest. So hopefully that answers the clarification. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Yes, initially we are das, anudas, anudas. So we start our journey with serving the devotee and the devotee, the servant of a servant of a servant of a servant.
We're always das, anudas, anudas. We're always servant. It's just the mood of the service is different. We can never replace Radharani, we can never replace Yashodhama, but what we can do is be their servant or the servant of their servants in that mood.
Yes, Prabhuji. Any other questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I just wanted to clarify my understanding regarding Lord Krishna playing as a role of Lord Sri Ram, and how he abandons Sita Devi, and in this instance he is like helping his devotees. All these princesses were fallen, and he helps, he marries them and he rescues them. So is it because here he's presenting a relationship between a Lord and his devotees, and as Lord Sri Ram, it's presenting an example of relationships that how an ideal king should behave? Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding also. Ideal king, ideal householder, ideal husband, presented all of those for us to learn from. And here, yes, philosophically, that's one thing, but the cheekiness in me also wants to bring out the fact that Krishna is naturally cheeky also, right? He's naturally playful. So he'll always break the rules in his Krishna form, but he won't break the rules in Ram's form.
Yes, that makes sense.
But,
thank you.
But yeah, the main thing is that obviously in this case, it's that relationship with the devotees that he's enhancing and
yes,
establishing.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much, Shobha Mataji, for that question. Any more questions or comments? I know we are almost about to end this session. Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, I can request Prashant Atma Dasa Prabhu. Is it possible for you to end the session? Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Hare Krishna to all the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna Bhajan Govindam Das. Prabhu, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for this nice class. Um, we give thanks and I request all the assembled devotees, please unmute ourselves and chant the Hare Krishna mantra in glorification of His grace. Bhajan Govindam Das. Hare Krishna,
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare
Hare
Ram, Hare
Hare
Ram,
Rama, Rama Hare
Krishna,
Kripa Sindhu Kai
Hare Yo Namo
Grace Bhajan Govinda Prabhu ki
Jai.
Shripapad ki.
Jai.
ISKCON Eldoret ki. Jai.
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 Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Wonderful class.